What if the airplane that changes the way we fly across the world isn't a massive double-deck giant, but a slim, single-aisle jet? Picture it. June 15th, 2022. No parades, no fanfare. Just a quiet runway in Hamburg, Germany. A familiar-looking Airbus A321 lifts off into the sky for its very first test flight. To the untrained eye, it looks like any other narrow-body aircraft. But inside the aviation world, this moment sent shockwaves. Because this wasn't just another A321. This was the beginning of a revolution. A skinny jet capable of flying nearly as far as its wide-bodied cousins, but at a fraction of the cost. This is the story of how we got here, how a single-aisle aircraft is about to transform the global airline industry. To understand why this is such a big deal, we have to rewind back to the dawn of the jet age. In the late 1950s and early 1960s, two aircraft became pioneers of transoceanic travel: the Boeing 707 and the Douglas DC-8. Both were slender, single-aisle designs, nothing like the wide-bodies we associate with long-haul flying today. Yet they were more than capable of crossing the Atlantic. The 707 in particular revolutionized international travel. With its swept-back wings, jet engines mounted under the wing, and sleek profile, it offered speed and range that piston-powered airliners simply couldn't match. Routes like New York to London, Paris, or Frankfurt suddenly became not just possible, but routine. The DC-8 joined the race, competing head-to-head with Boeing's jet and carving out its own market. In those early years, nobody thought you needed a massive fuselage to fly oceans. The 707 and DC-8 proved that narrow-body jets could carry people across continents and seas. But aviation was about to change. By the late 1960s, airlines faced a new problem: demand. Passenger numbers were exploding, airports were getting crowded, and airlines needed bigger aircraft to move more people at once. Boeing's answer was the 747, the queen of the skies. It introduced something the world had never seen before: two aisles. The 747 wasn't just big, it was colossal. It could carry hundreds of passengers, fly farther than its narrow-body predecessors, and its enormous lower deck could swallow tons of cargo. Suddenly, long-haul travel wasn't just for the elite. Airfares dropped, mass tourism took off, and global air travel entered what many still call the golden age. It wasn't just Boeing. McDonnell Douglas brought out the DC-10, and Lockheed developed the L-1011 TriStar. Airbus, the ambitious European newcomer, entered the market in 1974 with its first commercial jet, the A300. Every one of these planes had two aisles, more space, and more comfort. The widebody had become the gold standard for long-haul routes, but Airbus had another card up its sleeve. In 1984, while widebodies were stealing headlines, Airbus launched the A320 program. At first glance, it seemed unremarkable. A narrow-body meant to compete with Boeing's 737. But hidden in that decision was a masterstroke. The A320 introduced digital fly-by-wire controls, giving pilots unprecedented precision and reducing weight. It also came with a wider cabin than the 737, allowing for more comfort and flexibility. And most importantly, it was designed with efficiency in mind. What Airbus might not have realized in 1984 is that this little single-aisle aircraft would go on to become the backbone of fleets around the world. Over the decades, the A320 family became the most successful aircraft line in history. Here's the truth about airlines: their business lives and dies on fuel. Fuel isn't just an expense, it's often their single largest cost. On average, it makes up 30% of total operating expenses. That means even a small improvement in efficiency can swing the balance sheet from loss to profit. To put it in perspective, if a new engine reduces fuel burn by just 1%, that's millions of dollars saved every year for a major airline. Scale that across hundreds of aircraft, and the savings become enormous. So, when an aircraft promises double-digit reductions in fuel use, airlines line up. In 2010, Airbus unveiled the A320neo program, standing for New Engine Option. It looked like a familiar A320 on the outside, But under the wings were two cutting-edge engine choices: Pratt & Whitney's geared turbofan PW1000G and CFM International's LEAP 1A. These engines were nothing short of revolutionary. They slashed fuel consumption by 15 to 20%, produced fewer emissions, and were significantly quieter, cutting the noise footprint by half. The economics were undeniable. A single A320neo could save its operator millions annually compared to older models. Airbus applied the upgrade across the A319, A320, and A321. Only the smallest family member, the A318, was left behind. It simply hadn't sold in large enough numbers to justify the investment. The result? The A320neo became a runaway success, with thousands of orders placed almost immediately. Airlines wanted these aircraft because they could do what every airline executive dreams of: lower costs, higher margins, and better environmental performance. But Airbus saw another opportunity. What if you could take a single-aisle jet and make it fly transatlantic routes traditionally dominated by widebodies? That idea came to life in 2018 with the A321LR, long range. This wasn't just a stretched A320 with new engines. Airbus fitted the LR with up to 3 extra fuel tanks beneath the passenger deck, known as ACTs, additional center tanks. With these, the LR could fly up to 4,000 nautical miles. Equally important, the A321LR achieved ETOPS 180 certification. ETOPS stands for Extended Twin Operations, and in simple terms, it means regulators were confident the plane could safely fly routes that were up to 3 hours away from the nearest diversion airport, even if one engine failed. That opened the door to true transatlantic operations. Suddenly, airlines had a narrowbody that could cross the Atlantic. Routes like Dublin to New York, Lisbon to Boston, and Montreal to Paris were suddenly viable with a plane that cost far less to operate than a widebody. But as with every engineering solution, the LR came with a problem. Those extra tanks took up space that could otherwise be used for cargo. And in modern airline economics, belly cargo is crucial. Freight shipped in the lower deck often provides a major slice of an airline's revenue. So airlines were faced with a tough equation: carry more fuel to extend the range, but at the cost of cargo. Fewer passengers meant fewer bags. Less cargo space meant lost revenue. Every flight became a delicate balancing act. How much fuel, how many passengers, how much freight? Push the LR too far, and compromises had to be made. For routes like New York to Lisbon, the math worked, but stretch the mission deeper into Europe, and planners found themselves wrestling with hard limits. Unexpected headwinds could even force crews to make the tough decision: reduce payload, offload bags, or schedule a refueling stop. The LR proved the concept that single-aisle aircraft could take on long-haul missions, but it wasn't perfect. Airlines loved the potential, but they wanted more: more range, more flexibility, and fewer compromises. By 2018, the A321LR had shown the world that a single-aisle aircraft could cross the Atlantic. But for all its promise, it also revealed its limitations. Airlines wanted more range, more flexibility, and fewer compromises between fuel and cargo. The LR was a glimpse of the future, but not the final answer. The question inside Airbus's design offices was clear: what happens if we push this concept to its absolute limits? The answer arrived a year later at the 2019 Paris Air Show: the A321XLR, or extra long range. This wasn't just another tweak or a small improvement. It was a fundamental step change in what a narrow-body aircraft could do. When Airbus executives unveiled the XLR, it didn't come with fireworks or grand theatrics. But industry insiders immediately understood what they were looking at. Here was a single-aisle jet, based on the proven A320 family, that promised a range of nearly 4,700 nautical miles. That's long enough to connect city pairs like London to Delhi, Singapore to Tokyo, or New York to Rome, nonstop. Suddenly, missions once reserved exclusively for wide-bodies were within the reach of a narrow-body aircraft. The response was electric. Airlines had been asking for exactly this kind of plane for years, something that combined the economics of a narrowbody with the range of a long-haul twin. The XLR delivered that in a package airlines already knew how to operate. So how did Airbus make it possible? The breakthrough lay in fuel storage. On the A321LR, Airbus had extended range by adding up to 3 removable auxiliary fuel tanks axed beneath the passenger floor. The downside? Every ACT consumed valuable cargo space and added operational complexity. With the XLR, Airbus engineers took a different approach. They developed the rear center tank, RCT, a permanent integrated fuel tank built directly into the aircraft's structure, located just behind the wing box. The genius of the RCT was in its efficiency. A single integrated tank could replace 4 ACTs while weighing about the same as just one, and it only occupied the space of 2 tanks, freeing up the belly for cargo. The result was a huge gain: more range, more payload, and more cargo space, all at once. This wasn't a patchwork solution, it was a structural redesign. By embedding the tank into the aircraft's architecture, Airbus turned the XLR into something far more capable than its LR predecessor. Why does this matter so much to airlines? Because flexibility is everything. Take Aer Lingus, for example. In the summer, transatlantic demand is strong, and the airline deploys widebodies like the A330 on routes from Dublin to the United States. But in the winter, demand drops sharply. Widebodies become unprofitable to operate, yet airlines don't want to abandon year-round service. With the A321XLR, Aer Lingus can swap in a smaller, more efficient aircraft during the off-season, keeping routes alive without bleeding money. The plane adapts to the demand curve. Or consider JetBlue's strategy. Their A321LRs, and soon XLRs, carry just 138 seats, far fewer than many regional jets, because they're configured with premium Mint business class suites. This allows JetBlue to offer a boutique, high-yield experience at a fraction of the cost of running a widebody. That's the XLR's power. It doesn't just cater to low-cost carriers looking to test long-haul markets. Legacy airlines, budget airlines, hybrids, everyone sees value in it. Whether it's about seasonal demand, premium experiences, or opening new routes, the XLR gives airlines options they've never had before. For airlines, the math is irresistible. Compared to older widebodies, the XLR burns about 30% less fuel per seat on similar missions. Combine that with lower maintenance costs, fewer crew members required, and the ability to operate from smaller airports, and the operating economics are transformative. Think about it. A Boeing 787 or Airbus A330 might be too big for a route like Toronto to Malaga or Boston to secondary European cities. But with the XLR, those long and thin routes become viable. Suddenly, cities that could never support a widebody service gain non-stop international flights. For passengers, this means less time connecting through big hubs and more point-to-point service. For airlines, it means capturing new markets at lower risk. As groundbreaking as the XLR appeared, it wasn't without controversy. Shortly after the aircraft's announcement, the European Union Aviation Safety Agency, EASA, raised concerns about its novel fuel tank design. The RCT, while efficient, sits in what safety engineers call the crush zone, the lower fuselage area designed to absorb impact forces during a belly landing. The worry was simple but serious. In the event of a gear-up landing, could the RCT maintain its integrity, or would it increase the risk of a fuel fire? Regulators weren't willing to take Airbus's word for it. They wanted proof. To satisfy regulators, Airbus engineers had to rethink the XLR's lower fuselage fairings, the aerodynamic coverings under the plane. Originally designed with lightweight composite materials, these fairings now had to serve as a protective barrier in the event of a crash. The solution involved redesigning the fairings to be stronger and more crashworthy, capable of absorbing impact forces while shielding the RCT. This wasn't a minor adjustment. It required extensive testing, new material choices, and changes to the aircraft's certification program. The certification delays weren't catastrophic, Analysts estimated about a 9 to 12-month setback, but they highlighted a fundamental truth in aviation. Every innovation must prove itself not just in daily operation, but in the rarest worst-case scenarios. This tension between innovation and regulation is nothing new. Every major aircraft program faces it. Boeing wrestled with it on the 787's composite fuselage. Airbus faced it with the A380's massive new wing structure. And now, the XLR had its turn. But Airbus stood firm. They maintained that the redesigns would not compromise performance, only add time to the certification schedule. For airlines, the delay was frustrating, but compared to the multi-year setbacks of other aircraft programs, it was relatively modest. Why all the fuss? Because revolutionary aircraft are rare. Most new models in aviation are evolutionary, slight improvements in efficiency, range, or passenger comfort. But the XLR represented something bigger. It wasn't just about shaving fuel costs. It was about redefining what a narrow-body aircraft could do. Industry analysts immediately saw parallels with another legendary aircraft, the Boeing 757. Beloved by pilots and airlines alike, the 757 offered range, flexibility, and efficiency that no other narrow-body could match. Even after production ended in 2004, airlines kept their 757s flying because nothing could replace them. Until now. The XLR, many argued, was the modern 757, updated with 21st century technology, 25% better fuel economy, and the potential to open hundreds of new routes worldwide. Momentum builds. Despite regulatory hurdles, orders for the XLR poured in. Airlines across every business model signed up. Legacy carriers like American Airlines and Lufthansa, low-cost giants like Indigo and Wizz Air, and premium-focused airlines like JetBlue. By the early 2020s, the XLR had already racked up more than 550 orders, a staggering number for an aircraft that hadn't even entered service yet. The message was clear. The industry believed in this airplane. When the A321XLR finally took to the skies in June 2022 for its maiden flight, it wasn't just a test of engines, wings, and systems. It was a test of an idea that airlines had been chasing for decades. A single-aisle jet that could cross oceans efficiently, profitably, and without compromise. For Airbus, this was not simply another variant of the A320 family. It was a strategic strike aimed squarely at redefining what long-haul means. And for airlines, it represented the chance to rethink their networks in ways that had once been unthinkable. But before we dive into what this aircraft means for the future, let's take a step back and remember where the industry stood when the XLR appeared. The shift in the airline market. For much of the late 20th century, aviation was dominated by the hub-and-spoke model. Large widebodies like the Boeing 747, 777, and Airbus A340 ferried hundreds of passengers at once into massive hubs, London, New York, Dubai, Singapore, where they would connect to smaller flights for their final destinations. It was efficient in one sense. Airlines could maximize load factors by funneling traffic into fewer high-density routes. But for passengers, it often meant long layovers, detours, and the frustration of having to transit through a hub when all they really wanted was a direct flight. Enter the A321XLR. With a range of 8,700 kilometers, about 4,700 nautical miles, it can connect cities that previously required a stopover. Think Rome to Miami, Montreal to Athens. Delhi to Sydney may still be out of reach, but dozens of long, thin routes suddenly become viable. For airlines, this is revolutionary. Instead of flying a half-empty widebody on a marginal route, they can deploy an XLR, fill 200 seats, and make the numbers work. Instead of funneling every passenger through a hub, they can offer point-to-point travel that customers prefer. In short, the economics align perfectly with modern demand. One of the biggest questions travelers ask is, what's it actually like to fly long-haul in a single-aisle jet? The thought alone makes some people nervous. After all, most of us are used to crossing oceans in wide bodies with 2 aisles, higher ceilings, and a greater sense of space. A single aisle might sound claustrophobic for a 6 or 7-hour flight. Airbus has worked hard to counter this perception. The A321XLR, despite being a narrowbody, incorporates modern cabin designs, quieter interiors, larger overhead bins, customizable mood lighting, and advanced air filtration systems. With the right cabin layout, airlines can make the ride feel much closer to that of a widebody. Of course, comfort still depends on the airline. Some carriers will opt for extra legroom and premium touches. Others, chasing low-cost efficiency, may configure their XLRs more tightly. But the key point is this. For passengers, the option of a non-stop flight often outweighs concerns about cabin width. Most would rather sit in a single aisle for 7 hours than deal with 2 layovers and a 14-hour slog. Here's where things get interesting. Airbus has carved out a space that Boeing has struggled to match. Boeing's 757 once occupied this middle market beautifully, a single aisle with transatlantic legs. But the 757 was discontinued in 2004, and Boeing has never produced a true successor. The 737 MAX series, while efficient, lacks the range and payload to cover these long, thin routes with the same confidence. For years, Boeing teased the so-called New Midsize Airplane, NMA, a jet that was supposed to fill the gap between the 737 and 787. But delays, financial struggles, and the fallout from the 737 MAX crisis have left the project in limbo. Meanwhile, Airbus has surged ahead with the XLR, capturing orders from carriers worldwide who don't want to wait a decade for Boeing's response. As of 2025, the A321XLR has accumulated over 500 firm orders from airlines across Europe, North America, Asia, and the Middle East. These aren't just budget carriers looking for flexibility. Legacy giants like American Airlines, United, Iberia, and Lufthansa have all signed on. They see the XLR not as a niche machine, but as a backbone for the next era of medium and long-haul travel. Of course, no aircraft enters service without challenges. Regulators have scrutinized the XLR's design, especially its unique rear-center fuel tank, which enables that record-breaking range. Safety requirements demanded additional fire protection systems, which added weight and delayed certification. Originally planned for entry into service in 2023, the XLR's debut has been pushed back to 2025. Airbus also faces the delicate balancing act of managing expectations. Airlines love the XLR's promises, but if real-world performance doesn't live up to the hype, if fuel savings aren't as dramatic, if payload restrictions linger, if maintenance costs creep up, the shine could fade. And then there's the passenger question. While many will embrace the convenience of direct flights, others may still hesitate at the idea of long journeys in a narrow tube. Perception, in aviation, is as powerful as performance. Still, it's hard to overstate the XLR's significance. This is more than a plane. It's a symbol of aviation's shift toward efficiency and flexibility. Think about the broader context. Environmental pressures are mounting. Governments are cracking down on emissions. Travelers are becoming more conscious of their carbon footprint. Wide bodies, while powerful, are not always the greenest option, especially when they're flying half-empty. The A321XLR, with its smaller footprint and lower fuel burn per passenger, offers a more sustainable alternative. Airlines can right-size their fleets, flying fewer empty seats and optimizing every drop of fuel. That doesn't solve aviation's environmental challenges overnight, but it's a step in the right direction and a tangible response to growing criticism. It also reshapes the geography of air travel. Secondary cities that once dreamed of direct intercontinental flights may finally get them. Instead of routing through London or Frankfurt, a passenger could fly directly from a mid-sized city in the US to one in Europe. That decentralizes aviation, opening new opportunities for both airlines and travelers. So, what does the future hold? The A321XLR is not a silver bullet. There will always be a place for wide bodies on trunk routes like New York to London, Los Angeles to Tokyo, or Dubai to Sydney. You can't replace a 500-seat A380 or a 300-seat 787 with a 200-seat narrowbody, and expect the same economics. But what the XLR does is expand the map. It makes new routes possible, keeps old ones profitable, and gives airlines a tool they've been missing since the 757. It is, in many ways, the right aircraft for this moment in aviation history, a moment defined by tighter margins, environmental scrutiny, and shifting passenger expectations. Airbus has bet big on the idea that the future of long-haul isn't just about size, it's about precision. Not flying the most passengers possible, but flying the right number of passengers to the right place, at the right cost. And as we look ahead, the question becomes, how will Boeing respond? Will they finally launch the long-rumored NMA? Will new technologies, hybrid propulsion, hydrogen, sustainable fuels, change the equation again? The A321XLR may not be the final answer, but it is, without question, the aircraft that has redefined the conversation. So the next time you board a flight, glance out the window. If you see a slender Airbus A321 with a little XLR painted on its side, know this: you're sitting in a plane that represents a turning point in aviation. Not the biggest, not the flashiest, but perhaps the smartest. Because in the end, revolutions in aviation don't always arrive with a roar. Sometimes they slip quietly into the sky, changing the world one flight at a time.